Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. If you like what you hear today, be sure to like it, subscribe to it, share it with everyone you know. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates on upcoming episodes, because I'm pretty sure we got another one coming up just like it next week. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Stop by their state-of-the-art dealership between BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or check out metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today. Now let's get right into it. It's today's episode of Baxie's Musical Podcast.
What is it? What is it?
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
Resistance is useless.
If you were to look up a list of some of the best albums of the 1960s, you're likely to find the usual entries: Sgt. Pepper, Pet Sounds, Blonde on Blonde, Let It Bleed. But if you dig down a little further on the list, you're likely to find 1968's Odessey and Oracle by the Zombies. Now, if you're not completely familiar with the album, I guarantee you are familiar with the album's biggest hit single, Time of the Season, an absolute classic. But if you haven't heard the album that Time of the Season came from, then you would be missing out on one of rock's great masterpieces. The original Zombies only released 2 albums in the 1960s. Their first album, called Start Here, was released in 1965 and contained their first hit single, She's Not There. Later in the year, they released another single, Tell Her No, and while it didn't do nearly as well as She's Not There, it would be their last big hit until they began recording their second album in 1967. Odessey and Oracle, which was released in April of 1968. Unfortunately, due to a lack of initial commercial success, the band broke up before Time of the Season would become a monstrous hit in the United States and elsewhere around the world. Meanwhile, the album became somewhat of a cult classic, and over the course of many years, Odessey and Oracle would become known as one of the essential albums not just of the 1960s, but of all time. But because of the breakup, it would take years before the songs of Odessey and Oracle would be played live. Keyboard player and primary songwriter Rod Argent would form the band Argent with guitarist and songwriter Russ Ballard. Lead singer Colin Blunstone would go on to have a successful solo career with nearly a dozen solo records, as well as multiple collaborations with the Alan Parsons Project. Finally, Argent and Blunstone resumed as the Zombies in 1999, and in 2017, they celebrated the 50th anniversary of Odessey and Oracle with a successful world tour, playing the album in its entirety. The following year, the Zombies were elected into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In July of this year, the Zombies were about to launch another U.S. tour when 79-year-old Rod Argent suffered a stroke and retired from live performances. Colin Blunstone, on the other hand, would continue touring. In fact, he'll be touring the UK next month to perform his amazing 1971 debut solo album, 1 Year, for the first time in its entirety. He's also released an EP of gorgeous demos called Less is More. He'll also be playing with the Zombies as well, performing the band's first album, Start Here, in its entirety as well. And we're going to talk about all of that with my guest today, Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Colin Blunstone of the Zombies, on Baxie's Musical Podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you. 7 years ago, I took my kids to see the Zombies at the Calvin Theater in Northampton, Massachusetts. They were like young teenagers at the time, easily the youngest people in the building. But it was such a wonderful night, and one of the things that was so great about it, and even my kids observed this before even I did, and it was so true. Watching you guys perform that night, and it was the 50th anniversary of Odessey and Oracle. Watching you guys perform, there was such an amazing sense of shared gratitude between the performance and the audience, as if you were as grateful to perform it as the audience was to observe you doing that. I mean, you don't always see that in a live performance, and at least not to that degree. What an amazing thing to be a part of. And you could tell that you and Rod were really enjoying that moment of presenting these songs, for some people, for the very first time ever. Tell me about that tour and what it's like to perform these songs after all these years.
Well, of course, it was an absolute joy to be playing these songs live. what was it, 40, 50 years after it was recorded, we never thought we would get the opportunity to play it because the band actually finished before the album was even released. And so we never thought we would get that opportunity. So it was a magical time for us. Here we are with our old mates, the original Zombies up there, and our new mates, the guys from the new band, all playing these fabulous songs written by Rod Argent and Chris White. So it was a magical time. I mean, I've never understood why artists would go on stage and play music that they don't want to play. I don't really understand that. I can just assure you that any excitement that you perceived on stage was genuine. We loved playing that album and getting back together again. And the whole thing, not only was it a wonderful adventure, but it was so unexpected. It was, sometimes with those concerts, I think it was 50 years, because we did do one to celebrate the 40th anniversary. We didn't expect the kind of reaction we got. Originally, it was going to be one show in London, which grew to 3 shows because it sold out so quickly. And then the next year, we all did different things. So the next year we got together again and we played other places around the UK. And then eventually we came to the States. And so we were actually playing it 50 years after it was recorded. And I mean, it's a very strange feeling. And of course, it's a very emotional feeling too, because it takes you back to that time. Music's wonderful at that, isn't it? Whether you're listening to it or whether you're playing it, it takes you back to those days when you're 22 and 23 and all these memories are flashing through your mind. And the time when we were in Abbey Road in Studio 3, we had £1,000 to spend in Abbey Road. Abbey Road even then was a very expensive studio. And we had to record very, very fast to complete that album. But it was a great experience.
I could tell that you and the rest of the band were surprised by the reaction of the crowd and how much love there was for these songs. I mean, not just Odessey and Oracle, but the first half of the show, you're playing some of your early hits and some of these early songs. People were just so happy to see you doing this, and considering the history of the band and the fact that you broke up so soon after recording that album, that there was just so much love for the Zombies that night. It was really very, very special.
Absolutely, and I think we've always felt that, particularly in America, because American audiences are very demonstrative. If they like the show that they're watching, they'll let those artists know how they feel. And of course, that lifts the artist. That's what all artists live for, to get a wonderful response like you saw that night. What a great experience to be on stage. You would give a completely different performance in that kind of environment than if you were caught in, some terrible old bar with 3 people all drunk, no one interested in what you're doing. You'd still try and give your best, but it would be a completely different experience to playing in a wonderful environment like that.
Now, obviously, you're continuing to perform, and not just with the Zombies, but also the solo tour. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. But you guys were ready to tour again, and then suddenly Rod fell ill. First of all, tell me, how he's doing and about his decision to retire from live performance.
Well, Rod's doing amazingly well. It's still early days. My information is that the intense healing goes on from 2 months to 6 months. That's when a lot of the healing happens, when you've had a stroke. And so he's just entered into that period now. I mean, he's pretty much back to himself, really. I think he gets a little tired, but it's early days yet. But he has decided he's not going to tour anymore. He's very much wants to keep writing and recording, but he just feels that maybe it would be wise for him, health-wise, to not tour anymore. So I think he's in a good place. He's getting better day by day. And I think he's made a very wise decision to protect his health in the future, and he's not going to tour.
So let me ask a difficult question, because you could very easily have taken this moment to say, you know what, maybe I'm going to step back from performing as well. But you chose not to do that. Tell me a little bit about your decision to continue on, not just as a member of the Zombies, but also as a solo artist?
Well, I've always kept a solo career ticking over. Obviously, I was committed to the Zombies, and the Zombies were a band that toured constantly. But if there was a gap in the year, then I would try to get out and play some solo dates, because it's a funny thing, but I've had more hits in the UK than the Zombies have. But of course, in America, I haven't had any hits at all. So there is an audience here for me. And I'm not in competition with the Zombies at all. Of course not. I'm in both bands. I want them both to be successful. I've always thought that they can complement one another, and so it's not. It was quite a simple decision, really. I probably would have toured with a solo band next year anyway. It happens that we've got a Zombies festival coming up at the end of the first week of November in the UK, and I'm going to play with my solo band on the first night, and I'm going to play my first solo album, my debut solo album, in its entirety from start to finish, which is, again, going to be a very emotional thing, as the same as Odessey and Oracle was. This album was released in 1971, and it's the first time that I was a featured writer, really. I wrote 4 of the 10 tracks. And so these first few songs that I wrote, I'd written 2 songs before, but these are amongst the first songs I'd ever written. They're very special to me. So it's going to be quite an emotional time when we play, I think.
I've actually been spending a lot of time listening to that record one year, and from 1971. It's a very impressive debut. I mean, the songs are terrific, but I keep thinking to myself, I know you're going to be performing these songs, and I don't know if it's the first time you've ever you played them out in its entirety before, but as I'm listening to these songs, I'm going, man, these are not simple songs to sing. These must have been challenging when you were in your 20s, never mind trying to recreate them 53 years later. Like in particular, I listened to I Can't Live Without You, which is a fantastic song, but that is like at the very tippity top of anyone's register. I'd be scared to death to tackle a song like that. How do you prepare yourself to go back to those songs and give those kinds of performances?
Well, I think it's very important if you want to be a professional singer in later life, shall we say, you've got to look after yourself first of all. So what I would say, if you're touring, drink plenty of water. Now, this is going to sound really basic, but drink plenty of water, stay hydrated, get plenty of sleep, eat sensibly. That's just common sense. And then after that, what I've done in later life is I studied with a singing coach probably 20 years ago now. And he just taught me some basic principles of singing technique, so that I just know a little bit, only a little bit about singing technique. And he also gave me a set of singing exercises twice a day, once before sound check and once before the show. And I find that really helps me. First of all, it warms my voice up, but also it's made my voice stronger and more accurate, to just know this little bit of singing technique, to be able to support my voice with my diaphragm, and also to do these exercises to warm my voice up. So I think that's really helped me. And I would recommend, listen, I'm not an expert on singing by any means, but I think as you get older, you have to find a system that suits you. Because when I was first singing in 1964, I wasn't schooled at all. That's just how I was born. I could sing, but your body changes as you get older. Your voice is a muscle, and in the same way that you can't run around all day like you can when you're a kid, it's the same with singing. You need to look after it and your voice, and you need to understand a little bit of how it works. That's my theory. I'm sure there are lots of people of my age that sing great and don't do anything, and good luck to them. But that's what's worked for me.
Well, and it clearly does. I mean, not just having seen you sing live just a few years ago, but you've also released this gorgeous new EP of demos. Less is more.
Right. Yes.
And I mean, I don't know how old these songs are, but your voice sounds absolutely amazing. It's just this beautifully gentle collection of songs. Tell me about those demos.
Well, I think they were recorded 4 or 5 years ago now. And they were just a way of me presenting songs to people. I probably at the back of my mind, I was probably thinking I could play them to Rod and see if the Zombies would record them. And actually, the Zombies did record 3 of them. But what intrigues me about that is the difference in the recording process of those demos, which were done extremely quickly. You know, one afternoon, I did them all. Where sometimes when we're recording sophisticated tracks, we can take days to get a track right, you know, and it was just great fun to do it. And I'm definitely going to do some more. I have a little problem in the guitar area. I'm not a great guitarist. I started off by being the rhythm guitarist in the Zombies. And as you can see, my career didn't develop very far because I got moved around to being the lead vocalist. And so my guitar playing is better now, but I don't think I could ever be a professional guitarist.
Well, what's interesting about these demos is, it's such an intimate sounding record, and it's very clearly it's Colin Blunstone, but it also has kind of like a Nick Drake feel to it, just you and a guitar, and it's beautiful. And and because they're demos, most demos are meant to guide you through a larger production process, but they're so intimately beautiful that I almost wouldn't want you to do any more to these songs. They're perfect as they are. Your voice continues to sound. When you say it's stronger now, it's absolutely true. That's what floored me about these demos, because I've talked to many vocalists who, as they age, it is much harder to keep their register, together, their tonality together, and you have certainly done that. And this group of demos just completely proves it.
Well, thank you very much. I've been lucky, I think, especially with keeping my range. I can still hit the top notes. So there's a degree of luck in that. And because, everybody changes as they get older, and I'm no exception to that. I think my voice, it sounds similar to what it was when I was younger, but it has changed. But I've kept the range. And certainly with all the Zombie tracks, we sing all of those in their original keys, and most of my solo things as well. Yeah. I sing them in the original keys. And I've just been fortunate.
Over the years, the legacy of Odessey and Oracle has grown, so tremendously since it was released many years ago. And, in spite of, Time of the Season, which was one of becoming the big hit, it was not a commercial success when it was released. And ultimately that led to a dissolution of the band, and you wound up breaking up. But it took a long time before anyone realized within the band that Time of the Season had started to become a hit anywhere in the world. Looking back on it now, do you think it was premature to quit, or do you think that was just like the natural arc of the Zombies at that time?
Well, it's a really interesting question. The short answer is I don't know. I think we were pretty drained at that point. Been working constantly for 3 years. And the non-writers were absolutely flat broke. And you can't go on indefinitely like that. So there were serious reasons that led us to break the band up. But at the same time, I've always been intrigued at what we might have done next. Because I think Rod and Chris had hit such a wonderful songwriting streak. They were just writing such great songs. Every song on Odessey and Oracle is stunning. It's so good. And I do wonder what we might have done next. So I don't think the other guys feel that way. Whenever they've spoken about it, they always give me the impression that the right thing to do. It was inevitable, and that was it. But there isn't just an element of regret for me. And I would have liked to have known what the Zombies could have done next after Odessey and Oracle. We'll never know.
Interestingly enough, when the band did break up, you were pretty much, in your mind, you were done with your music career and started working in insurance, which is kind of an odd place to go from being a rock star to insurance. But that's what you did. What was it that got you back into music?
Well, first of all, people sometimes talk about this insurance thing. You chose insurance over music. I didn't. There was absolutely no interest in the Zombies, or I don't like to say it, but me. There was no interest in me. The phone was not ringing, and I had no money. and I had to just apply for jobs. And the first job I got offered was from this big insurance company. And in a way, I know nothing about insurance. I worked there for nearly a year. I still know nothing about insurance. But in a way, it helped me because it was a very busy, big insurance company in the center of London. The phones were ringing off the hook. And I didn't have the time to worry and be sad about the zombies. It was a very emotional time, but I didn't have time to get involved in all that because I was kept busy with working at this job. But then what happened towards the end of my insurance adventure, a producer called Mike Hurst called me, and he's a UK producer, and he just produced the early Cat Stevens tracks. Okay. I'm not sure if they were hits in America because Cat Stevens seems to have had sort of 2 careers, or even 3 careers, because obviously he's got a career now as well. But it was Matthew and Son, I'm Going to Get Me a Gun, and I Love My Dog. I don't know if they were hits in America, but they were big hits here. And Mike Hurst rang me out of the blue. So there I was answering the phones in the insurance office, and I get this call, Colin, you should be making records. I want to produce you. And I've just been talking to someone about their car accident, or can they get the car to the garage, or whatever it is was going on. And suddenly I get this phone call, and I wasn't sure I wanted to get back into the music business after the drama and emotional wretchedness of the end of the Zombies. But he's very persuasive, and I've just worked with him quite recently. I did a charity show with him about 2 weeks ago, and it reminded me how persuasive he was. And he said, look, I'll get some time at Olympic Studios in Barnes, which is a studio that the Stones used to use. It's not there anymore, but it was a very, very good studio. And he said, I'll record the tracks, and you come along after work and sing on these tracks, and we'll see what we've got. And so I can't remember exactly, but I imagine that I arrived in my heavy woolen pinstripe suit from the office to sing these tracks with Mike. And somehow we decided to re-record She's Not There. And also, I don't know who was responsible for that idea. I think Mike, actually. And then somebody else thought I should change my name, maybe because we were re-recording She's Not There. And I became Neil MacArthur overnight. And the crazy thing is, see, like when I started doing these tracks, for me, it was all just an experiment to see how I felt getting back in the studio. I wasn't thinking long term. And one of these tracks, She's Not There by Neil MacArthur, was quite a big hit in the UK. And suddenly I was back in the music business. And I was an ex-insurance clerk overnight.
There wasn't anyone who said, hey, this MacArthur guy, I think, is ripping off the Zombies. This guy's ripping on Colin Blunstone.
I don't think so. It was very, very different. No, I mean, people realized soon, and I don't know why the name changed, because within days, people knew it was me. But yeah, it was a very different version. And it was in a much lower key to start with. Well, in the Zombies, it's in A minor. And with Neil MacArthur, it was in E minor. So it gives it a very different feel. But it was a hit. And I was off and running. I was a solo artist. It didn't last that long. Poor old Neil. He had 2 more singles. And then they weren't so successful. And I think people lost interest. And Neil was cast asunder. Once again, remembering that Neil MacArthur is me, nothing much was happening. And then I was coming home from a party with Chris White, who was the original bass player in the Zombies. And he said, Colin, why don't you forget the Neil MacArthur thing? Go back to your real name. Rod and I have got a production company. We would like to produce you. And start your solo career all over again. And that just seemed like such a great idea. I was going to be produced by Rod and Chris, who produced Odessey and Oracle. We were going to record in Studio 3 in Abbey Road, which is where we recorded Odessey and Oracle. And the recording engineer was Peter Vince, and he was the main engineer on Odessey and Oracle. So it was a very comfortable situation to be in. For someone who's still at the very beginning of their solo career, it was a great way to start off.
And of course, that resulted in 1 year. And it took a full year to make that record.
But that's it. I mean, that's really, it's kind of obvious looking back. That's why I called it 1 year, because the Zombies always recorded very quickly. And I couldn't believe that it'll take me a year to record the album. But I think it was partly because Rod was obviously very involved in Argent, his second band, and they were a touring band. So he was away a lot. And I think that was one of the main reasons why it took longer than we would have expected to finish. But it was great working with Rod and Chris again. And I was really fortunate in the tracks that are not with strings. It was basically Argent playing on those tracks.
Wow.
And I was just a huge fan of Argent. I still am. I think that they were one of the very best bands of that era. Fabulous writers and wonderful recordings. Brilliant.
One of the parts of the zombie story that I just find to be so amazing to me is you talk about the Zombies getting ripped off by another performance. Part of the story is that once the Zombies broke up and didn't get a chance to tour anywhere, that there were a couple of fake zombie impersonators out there, at least two of them that I know of, and one of them included Dusty Hill and Frank Beard from ZZ Top. And then these were bands that were existing, trying to pass themselves off as you guys. I mean, how did you even learn that this was happening?
Well, I think it's quite common knowledge, actually. I certainly was aware. I didn't know about who was in the band. I think there were three, actually, that were impersonating us. And there was one later on as well. But from these three bands, the story that I remember is that Chris White was in New York, and he was in Rolling Stone's offices. And Rolling Stone told him they were doing an article on these three bands, and also there were some other bands that were impersonating the Animals, and a really strange one, they were impersonating the Archies, which were never a band in the first place. I never quite understood that one. But anyway, they were impersonating the Zombies and the Animals. And Rolling Stone got Chris White to phone the manager of one of these bands and just ask him what's going on. So Chris did, and the manager believed he was talking to a journalist from Rolling Stone. And he said, the thing is that we want to honor the life of the lead singer of the Zombies, who was tragically killed in a car crash. So we formed this, and this was in an article in Rolling Stone. So, it was very weird to read in Rolling Stone that I was already dead. Luckily, this wasn't true. This guy was just ridiculous stories, and he chose on the lead singer, which was me, to have been killed in a car crash, which was very interesting. There was another band later on, I think it was in the 80s, and this story, I must emphasize, I wouldn't suggest that you go around your business using these kind of tactics. But there was a band in the 80s pretending to be the Zombies. And again, there was no band at this time. The thing was that they were very, very bad, this band. They were English, they weren't American, but they weren't very good. And they were giving performances and not going down very well. If they'd have been a really good band, I might have felt a bit differently about it, but they were really poor. And I did try to get them stopped. I think we all did. I spoke to the Musicians Union. I spoke to some lawyers and other people, and suddenly they stopped. And I thought, well, I don't know what I did, but I must have done something. I wrote to their manager. I remember that. Well, I must have done something.
You came back from the
dead.
They
just stopped.
You came.
Yes, maybe I scared them because I came back from the dead. But apart from that, the real story is that they played an atrocious set in a club. And a genuine zombie fan was watching, and he went through to the dressing room and he pulled a gun on them. And he said, words to the effect of, you are not the Zombies and you will cease pretending to be the Zombies. And as I said, I wouldn't advise anyone to conduct their business like this, but by God, it was effective. And they stopped. That was it.
That's amazing. Colin, I don't have a whole lot of time left with you. I got to tell you, this has been a real joy. Like I said, I've been a fan of the Zombies, virtually my entire life, and a huge fan of Odessey and Oracle. I wish you best of luck on your tour. The solo album, 1 Year, is beautiful, and the new EP is fantastic, too. So it's a real joy to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. Do wish us luck when we play 1 year from beginning to end.
Yes, good luck.
It's going to be challenging, but it's going to be fun. It's been great talking to you.
Take care, Colin. Goodbye now.
Yes.
The name of Colin Blunstone's new EP is called Less is More, and if you ever get a chance to see the Zombies or Colin Blunstone live, do it. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I'd love to hear about it. You can always email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.